Of all the monuments man has created throughout the centuries, there is none so magnificent in its presence nor so powerful in its message as this, our nation's Capitol. It is a monument to our most cherished ideal as American citizens, the right of free people to govern themselves. But the Capitol is more than just a monument. It is a living museum, a repository of some of our most treasured works of art. At the same time, it is an office building in some ways like any other, where people come to work each day and do their jobs. In this case, their job is to help carry out a promise made some 200 years ago, that a government would be instituted to secure for all men the promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the government would derive its powers from the consent of the governed. I'm Senator Bennett Johnston. 1987 marks the bicentennial anniversary of America's Constitution and of our Congress. I invite you to join me now for a tour of this magnificent structure, Congress's home, our nation's Capitol. The history of this building parallels the history of our republic, from its humble yet ambitious beginnings when President George Washington in 1793 came to then what was called Jenkins Hill. He laid a cornerstone on an engraved silver plate somewhere over there to mark the beginning of construction of this building. Then the assembled crowd roasted an ox on a spit and ate and drank merrily into the night. That was the first and last time the cornerstone has been seen. Historians searched for it again in 1958 when the east front of the Capitol was extended, but it was never found. The design for the original Capitol building was the work of Dr. William Thornton of Philadelphia. His proposal was accepted in 1793 by President George Washington. Though the original structure seems modest compared to the Capitol as it exists today, Washington praised it for its grandeur, simplicity, and beauty of the exterior. During the same period, by the way, Major Pierre L'Enfant was busy designing the new federal city of Washington, which would rise from the swamps and pastures that existed here at the time. The precise center of the Capitol would be the spoke in L'Enfant's wagon wheel design for the city. Under the supervision of architect Benjamin Latrobe, the House and Senate wings of the building were completed, for the most part, by 1811. Then, because of the threat of war, funding for construction of the Capitol was stopped and the project set aside. Like our nation, this building, too, has been tempered by war. In the steaming August of 1814, British troops marched into the Capitol from this side, entered what was then the House Chamber. Inside those steps, one of the British commanders, Rear Admiral Cockburn, jumped to the Speaker's chair. He mocked our legislative procedure and shouted, "Shall this harbor of Yankee democracy be burned? All for it say aye." The soldiers then set fire to both the House and Senate wings. As fortune would have it, though, a powerful thunderstorm moved in across the Potomac that night and extinguished the blaze before the building was totally destroyed. Like the Republic, its foundation was secure, and it emerged even stronger than before. Following the War of 1812, construction resumed under the supervision of Charles Bulfinch, third architect of the Capitol, and the original building was completed in 1829. By the 1840s, America was already outgrowing its capital. When Washington laid the cornerstone for this building, there were only 15 states in the Union and only 30 senators and 105 House members. In 1850, we had 31 states, 62 senators, and 237 members of the House. Senator Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, who would later become president of the Confederacy, argued persuasively for an enlargement of the Capitol building. The second major phase of construction began July the 4th, 1851, with President Millard Fillmore laying the cornerstone for the new House and Senate wings. The most noteworthy speech of the ceremony was made by Daniel Webster, then Secretary of State. He used the occasion to make an impassioned plea for the preservation of the Union. for at the time relations between the North and South were rapidly deteriorating. The future of the Republic was very much in doubt. Even the Civil War did not stop this phase of the construction project. Work on the new House and Senate wings continued. But the building was now outgrowing the smaller dome of the original structure, and a new cast iron dome was added. Finally, Thomas Crawford's statue named Freedom was lifted to its place atop the dome in 1863. That marked the completion of the basic structure as it exists today. Renovation and restoration has continued since then, as we can see from this view where the sandstone west front of the Capitol is being restored. Sandstone may not have been the best choice of a building material, but it was the choice of President George Washington, who, it is said, owned an interest in the sandstone quarry where the original materials were purchased. Let's take a closer look at this living museum, your nation's capital, experience the rich history that is written here, and trace the footprints of some of the giants who have passed this way. Another suggestion George Washington made to the early designers of the Capitol was that a room be made available for the President so that he could tend to business involving the Congress. That idea was incorporated into the design of the modern Senate wing of the building, and we'll start our tour there, in the room proposed by Washington. We're now on the second floor of the Capitol, just off the Senate chamber, in what is called the President's Room, probably the most ornate room in all of the Capitol. It features the famous artwork and frescoes of Constantino Brumidi, who came to the United States in 1852 to escape political persecution in his native Italy. His works are featured throughout the Capitol, and there are no better example or more beautiful examples of his work than here in the President's Room. This is called the President's Room because legislation was signed by the President when their terms expired in March prior to the 20th Amendment. Abraham Lincoln met here with his cabinet to discuss the future of the Republic when the surrender of General Lee was imminent. In later years, the room was rarely used by presidents except for an occasional ceremony. Lyndon Johnson, for example, signed the Voting Rights Act here in 1965. It is now used for the most part as a place for senators to meet with guests or members of the press. In this room, a senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, was interviewed by a young lady reporter from the Washington Times-Herald, Jacqueline Bouvier. The marble busts are those of two assassinated presidents, James Garfield and William McKinley. The oil paintings are of President George Washington and his cabinet. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of War, Edmund Randolph, Attorney General, and Samuel Osgood, Postmaster General. Other paintings are of Columbus, representing discovery, Benjamin Franklin, history, Vespucius, exploration, and William Brewster, leader of the colonists at Plymouth Rock, representing religion. The frescoes on the ceiling are believed to be the earliest examples of this technique in America, the application of paint to a still moist plaster surface so that the colors are actually blended into the material. The four life-size Madonnas represent religion, legislation, liberty, and executive authority. The room is also called the Hall of Mirrors because the two mirrors on opposite walls create the illusion of an endless hall. The chandelier dates back to 1863 when it was purchased for the sum of $900, a big sum in those days. About that time, another company began to manufacture duplicates, but you can tell the duplicates from the original by the gas petcocks that controlled the gas when it was originally purchased. When the chandelier was converted for use by electricity, the cost of conversion nearly equaled the cost of the original chandelier, $700. The grandfather clock was purchased in 1887 for the price of $250. It was here, just outside the President's room, that Rose Long, the newly appointed senator from Louisiana and widow of the late Huey Long, made quite an impression on senators. Newly arrived in the Capitol, she came to this room seeing the sign "Senators Only." Being a senator, she walked in. Only to her embarrassment, she found that it was the men's room. We are here in one of the two grand staircases in the Senate wing. Because there was no electricity in the Senate, natural lighting was used whenever possible, as with these rectangular lay lights overhead, which were installed about 1860. Beneath the window is Francis Bicknell Carpenter's painting of 1864 depicting the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. These first floor corridors feature some of Bermude's porthole and crescent paintings, such as this one done in 1875 depicting negotiations for the Louisiana Purchase. At our feet, more of the enduring art which decorates our Capitol. This glazed tile, purchased from the Minton China Company of England in 1859, originally covered the entire Capitol floor. It has worn well, its colors still brilliant despite the millions who have walked these halls over the years. In this corridor and other locations around the Capitol, Bermude left some portholes blank so that future artists could record those important events that would occur after Bermude's time. Here's the latest, a rendering of America's Apollo moon landing by Alan Cox, another brilliant artist and muralist who devoted many years of his life to work in the Capitol. This is the Senate Rotunda. It was originally built as a stairwell, but when the Capitol was burned by the British in 1814, this part was destroyed and was replaced by this rotunda. On top of each column are tobacco leaves with flowers on top of that, and in the ceiling are cotton bowls. The two together, tobacco and cotton, represented the mainstays of our economy in those days, and Thomas Jefferson thought it important that both the cotton bowl and the tobacco leaf be honored not only here in the Senate Rotunda, but throughout the Capitol. The chandelier is a 19th century work of art. It contains some 14,500 European crystals. Beyond these doors stands the modern Senate chamber, completed in 1859. It has changed some with the times. For example, television cameras have been installed to accommodate gavel-to-gavel coverage for television for the public, but much of the Senate tradition has been preserved. There are still spittoons on the floor, though they are no longer used. 48 of the original mahogany desks made in 1819 are still in use here. Their occupants traditionally carve their names inside, and signatures of some of the great figures like Daniel Webster can still be seen. As a matter of fact, in my desk is the signature of Harry Truman carved in the bottom of the drawer. In this corridor, which connects the modern Senate chamber to the old wing of the Senate, we find one of the two statues sent to the Capitol by the state of Louisiana. This is a bronze sculpture by Arthur Morgan of Edward Douglas White, a soldier in the Confederate Army at age 16. He later went on to become Chief Justice of the United States from 1910 to 1921. Following this corridor, we come to the original Senate wing of the Capitol and the old Senate chamber. This was the second Senate chamber. The Senate met here from 1810 to 1859. During those years, Washington was a sleepy little country town, and actually the events that occurred here in the Senate chamber were one of the main forms of entertainment in sleepy Washington. They started with a very, very small gallery on this end of the Senate chamber, but as the years went by, the demand was so great that they had to put a gallery all the way around the Senate chamber. It was thought in those days that it enhanced the social status, especially of women, to be seen in the Senate gallery. In those days, senators dressed very formally in swallow-tailed coats. One prominent exception was Sam Houston, who would appear in a panther skin waistcoat, brightly colored serape, bright red vest, and giant Mexican sombrero. He would sit at his desk and carve little wooden hearts to be distributed among the ladies in the galleries. The modesty curtain was hung so that women would not be exposing their ankles in public. Often the gentlemen of the Senate would surrender their own seats here on the floor to the ladies in attendance. One Washington hostess wrote in her diary after a visit there that there must have been 300 ladies beside their attendant beau on the floor. The rulers of the people are truly their servants, and among those rulers, women are gaining more than their share of power. And of course, the crowds were treated to lively debate, as Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, and Stephen Douglas debated such issues as slavery, states' rights, and the cessation of the Confederate States. In May 1856, Charles Sumner delivered an especially brutal attack against a proposal that would have extended slavery to the state of Kansas. Among those he criticized was South Carolina Senator A.P. Butler. This is Sumner's seat in the old Senate chamber, and Preston Brooks, who was a cousin of South Carolina Senator Butler, found Senator Sumner sitting here in his desk, and defending the family honor, came in with a gold-topped cane and beat Senator Sumner here soundly with that cane, so much so that it took Senator Sumner 3.5 years before he could return to duty here in the Senate. This chamber contains one of the Capitol's most expensive and priceless works of art, a portrait of George Washington done by Rembrandt Peale in 1823. This Senate chamber is located directly above the first Senate chamber. When the Senate moved here in 1810, the Senate chamber directly below us became the home of the Supreme Court. This room served as the Senate's first chamber in the United States Capitol. The Senate met here from 1800 to 1808. As a matter of fact, just a few feet behind me, Thomas Jefferson delivered his inaugural address. This room is also noteworthy because Samuel Morse first demonstrated the telegraph here. He sent a message to his assistant who was standing by in Baltimore to the effect, "What hath God wrought?" The assistant sent back a message, "What is the news in Washington?" And they've been asking that question ever since. You'll notice the columns, arches, and vaulted ceilings, a tricky piece of architecture. During the reconstruction of this room in 1808, an Englishman named John Lenthal, who was called clerk of the works, or supervisor, prematurely pulled away some of the supports for this vaulted ceiling above us. The ceiling and the floor of the Senate chamber above came crashing down, killing Lenthal. The Supreme Court met here from 1810 to 1860. It was restored for our bicentennial. 80% of the furnishings are original. The busts are those of early Chief Justices. The relief here of Justice by the Italian sculptor Carlo Franzoni dates back to 1817. When this statue of Justice was delivered, decorators were dismayed to find that it did not have the traditional blindfold. Chief Justice John Marshall is said to have quipped that it didn't matter, it was impossible to see in this chamber anyway. We move now to the crypt, the first floor of the Capitol, directly beneath the dome. This is one of the original columns of the Capitol. Legend has it that these are bullet holes left by the War of 1812 when the British attacked, actually in 1814. It is more probable that it's simply the oxidation of the soft sandstone in the very humid weather of Washington. You will also notice the corn cobs on top of the column, which are the only place in the Capitol where corn cobs are used. We're now in the first floor corridor of the modern House wing. This is called the Hall of Columns, where more of the state's heroes in bronze and marble are located between the 28 marble columns. Originally, all of these statues were contained in Statuary Hall, but the architect of the Capitol was worried about so much weight being concentrated in one part of the Capitol that he distributed some of these throughout the Capitol. This corridor is known as Experiment Hall. Artist Alan Cox's murals depict some of the central events of American history. The opposite corridor leads to the Hall of Capitol, where Cox recorded other historic events. On the second floor, directly above us, is the chamber where our 435 members of the House of Representatives meet. Because it is the larger of the two chambers, it is used for joint sessions of the Congress, when foreign dignitaries or our own president address both the House and Senate. The House moved into this chamber in 1857, and every president since Woodrow Wilson has appeared here to deliver the State of the Union address. From here on the second floor of the modern House wing, we move back toward the center of the building and the first House chamber, now known as Statuary Hall. After the House moved from here, the area fell into disrepair. It was used most by hucksters who sold souvenirs, food, and even whiskey. It was repaired for the bicentennial in 1976. Louisiana's other statue is located in this hall, a bronze sculpture by Charles Keck of Huey P. Long, unveiled in 1941. The bronze plaques on the floor mark the location of some of the more famous members of the House, including Abraham Lincoln and here John Quincy Adams. Adams, incidentally, was the only man to serve as president and later serve in the House. Adams suffered a fatal stroke while seated at his desk here on February 21st, 1848. From this niche over the south wall, the Capitol's own Statue of Liberty has looked down on this chamber since the early 1800s. Above it, we again find tribute to the cotton blossom in the beautiful dome ceiling of the old House chamber. One of the interesting things about this room is the parabolic effect of the ceiling that reflects sound from one end to the other of the room. One of the interesting stories is about John Quincy Adams, whose desk used to be right where this plaque is located. He would sit at his desk at this point pretending to nap, when actually he was listening to the strategy of the opponents being plotted on the other side of the room, because he could hear their conversations, whispered though they were, coming down from the ceiling. We now enter the Great Rotunda of the Capitol, one of the largest in the world. It is 100 feet in diameter, 180 feet from the floor to the eye of the dome. It is here in the center of the rotunda that our nation's heroes have lain in state. The walls of the rotunda feature 8 giant oil paintings depicting the discovery and colonization of America. This is one of the most popular for tourists who enjoy its beauty, but also like to puzzle over this curious touch by the artist. He painted one of the figures with 6 toes. The giant bronze doors of the rotunda, weighing 10 tons, are known as the Columbus doors because of the panels showing various stages of Columbus's great adventure. On the walls above the oil paintings, reliefs in the sandstones commemorate Columbus and other heroes such as Walter Raleigh and John Cabot. Some describe other events in our early history: the rescue of John Smith of Pocahontas, Daniel Boone fighting the Indians, and the landing of the Pilgrims. Note the lower balcony here and the small balcony at the very top of the dome. Those are our next stops on a tour of the dome itself. We're now looking down from the Capitol Dome at some of the more famous paintings that we have. There's a frieze all along the wall, 8 feet tall and encircling the rotunda with 400 years of history from the landing of Columbus to the Wright brothers. This was Bromete's final work. In 1879, he was completing the panel showing William Penn's treaty with the Indians when he fell from the scaffold. He managed to grab part of it, however, and hung suspended about 60 feet above the floor until help came. He died several months later from the injuries. And another Italian artist, Filippo Constantini, continued with the frieze, working from Bromete's drawings. Constantini completed all but the last 40 feet or so, and those panels were later finished by Alan Cox. This part of the Capitol Dome was replaced during the Civil War, was completed in 1865. Bromete has been called the Michelangelo of the Capitol. We can see why in the frescoes he painted in the eye of the dome, his first work here in the Capitol. In the center is the apotheosis of Washington, with George Washington flanked by Liberty and Victory. The Capitol during the Civil War was used as a hospital, and the floor of the Capitol Dome was actually beset with hospital beds and wounded Union officers. Abraham Lincoln was asked during the Civil War how the United States could afford to spend such resources on building the Capitol when the nation was in great peril. His reply was that if people observe the Capitol being built, that they will have confidence that the Union will survive. He was right. Lincoln's words still ring true today. It remains a mighty symbol to ourselves and all the world of the faith we share in this democracy and the confidence we have in its future. In so short a time, it's impossible to experience and appreciate fully the beauty and history of this majestic building. Hopefully someday, perhaps during this bicentennial anniversary of our Constitution and of the Congress, you can complete your tour in person. Till then, I hope we have at least provided a glimpse of the rich treasures of art and architecture found here, the bold chapters in our nation's history written in these halls and chambers, and small but significant footnotes about the life and times of the people who have passed this way. Because of them and the republic they served, it has weathered the storm and strife of 200 years and emerged even stronger and more beautiful than ever, like the powerful dream it symbolizes.